Welcome back to the Parable Podcast. I'm Danielle Zapchenk. Today, we're going to have a conversation with Deb Knupp. Deb is a marketplace leader and an entrepreneur, and she shares how at a season of her life, the confidence dwindled and fear started peeking in.
I gave in to the qualities of the world and the expectations of mankind, and I ended up selling my company and relinquishing all of the gifts and all of the direction and guidance that governed the business to a set of really strangers whom I perceived were more gifted and more talented in areas for which I felt deep insecurity.
Whatever we are doing in our life, professionally or personally, I think we can all relate to those kinds of feelings, right? So let's jump into my conversation with Deb Knupp. We are here with Deb Knupp today. And Deb, thank you so much for being with us. I'm excited to get to know a little bit about you. Could you tell everybody, who are you? What do you do?
Well, thank you so much for having me. And I'll introduce myself through a couple of different lenses. So I'm Deb Knupp. I live in Chicago. I am the proud wife of Jason. I am the proud mom to 3 teenage daughters, Savannah, Sydney, and Kiera. And we reside in Chicago, and we do our life in urban mission work, and it's just been an awesome in terms of the personal experiences as I introduce myself today. I'm also a woman of faith who works outside the home, and for the last 20 years, I have made a living teaching marketing and business development training and consulting principally to lawyers. So I'm often referred to as the lady who teaches lawyers how to be lovable in marketing and business development context. And so it's definitely a workplace ministry that's very much a privilege to get to engage.
Like as a child, I'm sure you're not thinking, I want to go into marketing and I want to reach out to lawyers. Like, how did that connection happen?
It was really born, Danielle, out of kind of an early midlife reflection. I think of it midlife reflection, or actually say early life reflection. I was only 33, so I don't want that to be midlife. Let me correct that. But let me just say that at age 33, I had one of those moments where I had to ask myself, I had a wonderful career working in industry, but I felt like something was missing. And it was right around the time that I came to my faith and began to see how God had so much more for my life if I would entrust his call and his causes. And so I discerned that it would be an appropriate starting point to listen to the Holy Spirit. And what occurred to me is I really have passion around two things in my work, and it's in all my work. One is I believe that anything is possible when we access our capacity to build authentic relationships, when we have an ability to hold space and to be with people in a way that demonstrates and shows generosity, authenticity, a sense of service. Those things are really clear and important and an important core value. And then secondly, I find my joy often when I am able to hold space in service to others and helping them find the best version of themselves. So authentic relationships and helping people find the best version of themselves really was the design thesis that takes sort of as the arc of all of my experiences in my life. And so at 33, it happened to manifest into an entrepreneurial venture. And out of that was able to build a business. And at the core of marketing and business development success is teaching people how to access the capacity to be in service to other people and to demonstrate a level of care through a genuine, authentic relationship. And in doing so, the gift back is the gift of being a better version of yourself. So all of that came together. When you're in consulting, you're developing a consulting business. It was a real blessing to be able to attach those principles to something really concrete like revenue generation. And so hence the business was born. And through a great series of conversations and other people investing in me, I found the legal industry and the legal vertical and have been engaging in this work now for 20 years.
I think what speaks to me most is that authentic relationship and that authentic connection. And that just translates into whether you're in the marketplace, whether you're at home changing diapers, or whether you're at church or even in the grocery store. I mean, those authentic relationships are what help us grow and change as a human, and also directly connect us back to God. That's exciting. I'm excited to hear more. So I have plenty of questions, but I'm going to wait. Deb, why don't you share with us what parable story you'd like to share today? We can have a conversation around that.
Well, as we shared as we were getting ready for today, there are so many fantastic parables that I really think are, my life could absolutely be patterned by the lessons that I've learned and how I'm growing as a woman of faith in every aspect of my life. But the parable I've chosen to share today is the parable of the talents. And this is found in Matthew 25, verses 14 through 30. And I'm going to read the verses through the ESV translation. And so it begins, "For it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted them to his property. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. He who had received the 5 talents went at once and traded with them, and he made 5 talents more. So also he who had the 2 talents made the 2 talents more. But he who had received the 1 talent went and dug in the ground and hid his master's money. Now after a long time, the master of those servants came and settled accounts with them. And he who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 talents more, saying, 'Master, you delivered to me 5 talents. Here, I have made 5 talents more.' His master said to him, 'Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master.' And he also, who had the 2 talents, came forward, saying, 'Master, you delivered to me 2 talents. Here, I have made 2 talents more.' His master said to him, 'Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master.' He also, who had received the 1 talent, came forward, saying, 'Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow and gathering where you scattered no seed. So I was afraid. And I went and I hid your talent in the ground. Here, you have what is yours.' But his master answered him, 'You wicked and slothful servant, you knew that I reap where I have not sown and gather where I scattered no seed. Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and at my coming I should have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to him who has the 10 talents. For to everyone who has will be given, and he will be given in abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. And cast the worthless servant into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." Now, it's a pretty dramatic parable, I'd have to say, Danielle. And I think there's some really powerful lessons. And as I think about my experience and my work of having the confidence and entrusting God with the gifts and what he has given me, there's a real set of lessons that I've certainly pulled from this parable. And I would say that this parable really has sort of 2 iterations in my experience, in that this was a particular story of importance when I began and started my consulting business more than 20 years ago. And then it has now taken on new life in the last year, having gone through a bit of a transition and transformation with my business and having to remember the lessons of this particular parable.
So take me back to what spoke to you through that parable, maybe that time of transition in your business and how that worked for you. Because I can just think you read that parable and you can reread it over your life, but at certain seasons it means different things. So what does that parable mean to you?
When I originally launched my consulting business, it really corresponded with a time of fresh and new faith. So I became a believer relatively late in life. I had been a cultural Christian most of my life being raised in Texas. But at age 33, I just had a seminal moment, and it really was born out of a lot of pain and a lot of challenge. And through that, I gave God a chance, an honest chance. And what I love about the experience of becoming a new believer is the freshness and confidence that comes that when you put all your faith and trust in the Lord, there's a certain capacity of energy to really discern where God is going to take you. And that sense of fear and risk is replaced with the confidence that comes with God's truth, God's gifts, God's sovereignty. And so much of that was right at the very beginning. And it was so fresh to take advantage of the gifts that I'd been entrusted. God had given me a gift of teaching people how to build authentic relationships, and had given me gifts of knowing how to hold space. And out of that, taking the risk to start up a business. I didn't have any startup capital, so there was a certain bootstrapping that's required to take the risk. I took a significant pay cut in order to make this business a reality, and very much built the business initially with a strong kingdom mindset that if I had if I trusted God, I stewarded the gifts, and I invested those gifts well, that I could have confidence that God would not forsake me, and He would return to me that which would be the outcome or the blessings of that kind of faith and trust. And I have to say, it worked great for 14 years. Then, at a particular pivotal moment in my life, about 7 years ago, I had the opportunity to sell my business, and I was approached by a private equity firm. And I have to say, as a founder of a company and as an entrepreneur, many people often remark that the brass ring of a small business is when private equity or an outside investor wants to come and buy and invest in your business. And I can say at the time, the opportunities to scale, to grow a much larger business, there were a lot of enticements. It really sounded like something that I really should want as a founder and owner of a business, that I really should want to grow and scale my business and reap the economic rewards that would come along with it. And yet in my heart and my spirit, I knew that that wasn't necessarily the thing that had driven or brought me to that point to have this opportunity, but yet I felt immediately a sense of fear. I felt the experience of the world's expectations, and I even felt like in many cases as a female entrepreneur, I owed it to womankind that if I didn't sell my business, somehow I was letting down all women ever in the spirit of business. And so absolutely going against, really a loud voice in my mind that God was very much speaking to me. I gave into the qualities of the world and the expectations of mankind, and I ended up selling my company and relinquishing all of the gifts and all of the direction and guidance that governed the business to a set of really strangers whom I perceived were more gifted and more talented in areas for which I felt deep insecurity. Needless to say, having sold the business, and for the 6 years that we were a part of this business, I have a lot of gratitude for the lessons learned, and I certainly sharpened my skills as a business person, and I learned a lot of things that I know, but for that experience, I wouldn't have gained or experienced. But the most important thing I learned, Danielle, is that God had a much clearer plan for my life and my business, and with great humility and vulnerability, I had to come back to the table and essentially facilitate with partners a management buyback. And so for the last year, I'm ostensibly been leading with my colleagues a restart up of a very mature business. And in that space, the lessons of this parable really have come to life. And so I'm reliving the truth of what God is telling us in this parable of the talents, and trying to bring these lessons to life, and remaining very submitted to God's will, and to listen to what He would have me do in this season of leadership in my business.
When you think about your life, that there are you kind of see the overarching expanse. You hope like, oh, we want success. We want all these goals. We plan on what we're going to do in our lives. And we just don't know, because sometimes God says you need to hold back, or he wants us to learn and grow through a certain process. And that is hard. It's very challenging. And when you have those ideas of what you were saying, fear and insecurity, it's like, how is that ever going to happen? Like, why is this happening to me? You talked about fear and insecurity. Had that always kind of been a part of like how you were running business at the back of your mind, or that would just pop up just when in moments of weakness?
Well, if you look at the three servants in the parable, so I would say at the start of my business, I felt like the first servant, like the opportunity to start a company, to have the confidence to put my trust in the Lord and just trust that he would provide. It really felt like the provision. Like, got 5 talents, and I was like, what else am I to do? I'm going to invest those. I'm going to go for it. I'm going to listen to God. I'm going to build a company that's built, around his values, his will. And sure enough, it reaped success. And so the 5 reproduced 5 in a proverbial sense. And it was really, the insecurity wasn't in the beginning, it was born out of the success. And the more success the business had, and the more that the world and earthly and the flesh started to confirm the success, I think that's where the insecurity was introduced, where I maybe shifted who was driving the strategy and the game plan of the business. And as it became more and more around what the world said was success and what I should be doing as a leader and a good steward, fiduciary, steward of making money and commerce and all those things, that's where I really took on the persona of the third servant, where out of great fear to this external world idea of what success looks like, I just buried the talent. I just said, you know what, I'm afraid I'm going to miss something and I'm going to let people down. So I'm just going to play it safe. I'm going to relinquish all control. I'm going to sell my company. I'm going to turn over all of the work and the experiences of 14 years and entrust them completely and become an employee, a servant to this new business. And so I really personified the third servant. And often, it's easy to look at this parable and say, I wouldn't be, I'd have more boldness. But I can just say, I would have thought I would have had more boldness. But yet it was when the world's idea of success started to shape my thinking and my decision making more than what God's voice and direction were. That's when I became the third servant. And I'll tell you, conviction, when God is saying, well done, good and faithful servant, there's a certain momentum that is built. But man, when you get to the space of, you wicked and slothful servant, and it really, I think it was in this space of acknowledgement that I had buried my head. And so it was out of that courage. But what a great God we have in the spirit of being, redeemed and feeling that sense of restoration and nothing lost and no hangover of shame. But it's in this space now that I'm really operating on really 5 lessons. And I, in fact, there's a blog that as I was preparing for today, this blog called Finding God Among Us. The author is Shirley Alari, and she really sums up lessons of parables. And I thought perhaps this might be a good illustration for your listeners and something that folks may want to consider if this particular parable speaks to them. So her first lesson is, God has gifted us and entrusted us with blessings, full stop. And when I think about my own journey, I believed that in the beginning more than 20 years ago. I lost sight of that the gifts that I had received and the successes and the experiences, I was being entrusted with those. Those were not my own. Those belonged to God, and they had been gifted to me as a blessing to steward. I think the second lesson is that God expects us to use our gifts wisely and for his glory. And again, when we pursue any aspect, and in this case, building and running a company, when my mind was on for his glory and not for the world's glory, there was great benefit. And again, I'm sort of renewed now in this restored stage that this is all about using the gifts with wisdom and recognizing that wisdom comes from God himself, building something, again, for his glory. All right, the third lesson in Shirley's Finding God Among Us. God does not judge us all by the same standard. I think it's easy to want to believe that there's sort of this sameness And I do believe that this idea that to whom God gives much, he expects much. And again, I think I lost sight of that. And it was easy to, when I was struggling after selling my company, it was easy to sort of see myself, as a victim, or being in a space of, how could I have made this same mistake? And not recognizing that God gave me a lot of measures to invest and to engage. And I lost sight of that. And it's important to recognize that God will judge us to the standard and the gifts that he entrusts us. Number 4, the lesson: God will hold us accountable. That's conviction, full stop. And when I began to recognize that every minute that I didn't engage courage to facilitate a management buyback, that I wasn't just answering to my business partners or to my clients or to the marketplace, I was answering to God. And so honoring that accountability, notwithstanding the embarrassment or the feelings of vulnerability or feeling, a great sense of humility in that process, that God will hold an account. And lastly, the last lesson is we are all called to grow in the Lord. And as a person who is about to celebrate her 55th birthday, believing that maybe at this stage of my life I was going to be, on the, kind of at the peak and starting to wind down, I can say with great confidence, I feel like I'm just getting started again. And so there's a renewal of growth that I'm experiencing. So this parable is speaking to me both in the lessons that I have learned and how it is shaping my choices, my priorities, my way of engaging with this next round of business.
Well, thank you, Deb. That was really vulnerable for you to share, and just like what the emotions felt like, because sometimes we see somebody and we don't get like the peek behind the curtain of like everything that's going on in their head. Now, you said you and your husband have 3 daughters. If you kind of take off your workplace hat, when you get home, when you were going through that season, did that help shape the way you parented? Because your daughters get to see their mom going through, because our lives are not going to be sparkling and beautiful all the time. So they get to see their mom going through these challenges. How did that translate to your parenting?
Well, I have to say, parenting out loud and living your life out loud and has been really an important set of experiences that I've had, and in particular in this most recent season. And when I say about living my life out loud or parenting out loud, it's connecting the dots with not only what is happening, but the why and the how, and narrating that in progress. I think sometimes one of the parenting experiences is we often sort of pull from our past, and we try to be a good mentor and leader, and shape our children's experiences based on lessons learned. And that's valuable, except any person who's ever had a teenage person in their life, whether they're related to you or they're in your adjacencies, that there is a certain teen eye roll that parents absolutely don't know anything. So the looking back experiences to shape and give counsel on why I might be encouraging them to go one direction or another often will fall flat. It was such a gift to be in the midst of real challenge, real pain, real humility, and being able to use the lessons in the real moments as encouragement with visibility and transparency, and how I needed to grow and learn from that. It has also been a tremendous opportunity to kind of reorient around my faith and where God's voice plays into this. And again, when you're in a season of plenty, when things seem to be good, there's money to go on vacations, there's opportunities to, enjoy our lives. I can see, why sometimes it's easy to see those things apart from God and really just look upon those as sort of lavishing of kind of the flesh and the world's, how the world would characterize blessings. Very often, though, it's in the space of challenge and hardship and suffering that God's sovereignty and his beauty is best revealed. And there was so much of that, and continues to be, being able to narrate that out loud and show the connectivity real time, I think will be one of the greatest gifts in my parenting experience.
It's in that hardship and seasons of failure, and nobody says, yes, I want to go through that. But that's really where we're refined and we're challenged, and that kind of spreads through all of our lives, and also in our relationship with God. You're so right about that. For somebody who feels like they're like that last servant and they're just kind of like hiding their talents, what would you do to, maybe they feel a little bit convicted by this, what would you encourage them to kind of just like step out? How to like move past that?
The first response is absolutely don't stay stuck in a narrative of one, or in a place where you're trying to figure it all out. I think the first important counsel is to engage with a trusted confidant, someone whom you value their perspective, somebody who has a capacity to tell you the truth in love, and begin to sort of, again, live it out loud, wrestle out loud what it is that is causing the fear and insecurity, so that you can begin with response, with collaboration, begin to see how to look at what it is in the big picture that's causing fear, but then how you can begin to examine the smaller or more actionable steps in the name of discerning what it is that you are to trust, what risk you are to take. I think often at that third servant, if you look, it appears that he relied on his own sense of interpretation, and then he took it upon himself to do the thing that he thought best. I think he was well intended, but yet it produced such a negative and sizable consequence. And I think, again, we are given the gift of relationships and people, so that would be the first thing I would absolutely counsel. I think the second thing is to examine that there are lots of right ways to engage stewardship of gifts, and taking risks is not linear. I think that when we look at how do we step out and recognize that God has a great plan, and even if it feels uncertain, we don't have to do all the steps at the same time, but being able to look at the actionable or accessible steps and breaking it into smaller pieces. I think that there's great value in that. And then lastly, and I would say before acting, be in the Word. Before taking the action is to sort of sit in it and recognize that when you look at, I love the comparison of sort of how do you know whether you're operating in the flesh or the fruit? I mean, there's a great, in Galatians, it is like a great side by side. You can look and say, all right, am I feeling any of these things? If any of these things are present that are to the neutral to the negative, then you know that you're to sit and wait on the Lord, and to be in prayer, and to start there, so that you can come to the space authentically, supernaturally, to fruit of the Spirit. And so those would be some points of counsel before taking an action.
That's so good, because, I was just walking through, Moses and Abraham, and it is a season of waiting. And so, when you think about what are my next action steps, in my mind, for somebody who likes to get things done, okay, then that means that growth is going to happen by tomorrow. And then you just feel so disqualified, because you've set yourself up for something that's just not going to happen. So Deb, what would you say? You're working with lawyers, and I looked up the average statistic is that only 37% of lawyers are women. So you're working with a lot of men. Also, you're coming into their space, and you're helping them. You're trying to help them grow. You also have this faith perspective. What is that like for you, juggling lawyers and faith?
Well, I think it really comes back to the sense of, instead of trying to proselytize or come to a space working in a professional context, where everything has to overtly and directly, point to a scripture. I have personally found being the hands and feet of Jesus, being the fruit, compels more conversation, more curiosity, more interest than anything that I might profess in word or in scripture. And so I do find that there is something absolutely transformative when you can be love, you can be light, you can be compassion, you can be empathy in action with people. It changes them. And when you can hold space to help them see who they are, or in the space of where they've been created, or where their gifts and talents are, spiritual or otherwise, there is something powerful to have them experience themselves as the best version of themselves. And I think that both being the fruit in action and holding space for others to discover where their gifts and potential lie, and then giving them the encouragement, the training, the coaching to be in action, those things are deeply connected. And the source code is my faith, and the experience of Christ and my faith in action, I think, is what compels. And so it feels very authentic and natural to be the person of God versus the the proselytizer and promoting faith.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, and that goes right back to what you were talking about before with at the beginning about authentic relationships. And that's really what it is, because when we have an authentic relationship with somebody, that's when they can see our true heart and ask questions, and that's how we get to be Jesus to other people. So I appreciate you sharing that. Thank you so much for sharing your story. If people wanted to get connected or learn more about you, how can they do that?
I think the best way to find me is my business is Growth Play at growthplay.com. And so my contact information is there. And you can also reach out to me on my personal email. I'm Deb Knupp 1967 at gmail.com.
And Deb, one other thing, like your Growth Play is 100% women-owned business. I think that is fantastic. I think that's so great.
It is such a privilege to get to be in community with other women who are so uniquely gifted and talented. And I think it's just a reinforcement. And in this case, for me, it also happens to include gender. But when you look in Romans 12 and in Scripture, when there is a recognition that the parts, everyone has a part of the body, but it's only in the sum of the parts that the body is fully recognized. I live every day getting to be the best version of who I am, but not having to be the whole body, and getting to pair and partner with. And I think that's just one of the best gifts from God that I can certainly experience. And then to have other people experience that in their own walk and in their own journey is, again, it's beyond measure. So I'm going to hold it and keep leaning into God's call.
Well, Deb, thank you so much for diving into this conversation about your parable and how that goes back into the parable of the talent. You are definitely a light in the workplace, and I'm just grateful to meet you today and to hear your story. So thank you so much for sharing. Thanks for being on the Parable Podcast.
My pleasure. Great to meet you too. Thanks.
Thank you for Deb to share about the parable of the talents, which is found in Matthew 25, and how it applied to her career. And whether you're a professional or you're in the entrepreneurial space, you're a student or stay-at-home mom, it doesn't matter. God intends us all to grow and use whatever gifts and talents we have in our life for Him. Our son Reed, he's 8. And so we were talking about Sunday school one time, and he's like, Mom, I already know about all the stories in the Bible. I'm like, okay. And I think that's the kind of mentality we have sometimes when we hear these parable stories, or any story in the Bible for that matter. We kind of just brush over it because we've already heard it. But the truth is, the Bible is living and it's active. And so as we go through different seasons of our life, God uses His stories to get right to the heart of what we are going through. So some of the takeaway questions to think about or journal about this week is just to reflect about what we talked about with Deb today is this. Number 1, has there been a recent setback or failure in your life? And if so, how can you draw closer to God and hear His direction? Number 2, did you resonate with the idea of being stuck? Who is someone in your life that you can have that authentic relationship with, just like Deb talked about, that can challenge you and keep you accountable? Who is that person for you? Thank you so much for listening. A great way that you can continue to support the show and our future conversations is simply by just rating or review. Spotify, you can now do that right inside the app. It helps people find out about the Parable Podcast, and we greatly appreciate that. Number 2 is just joining the Parable Podcast email list. You get to hear stories from all of these lovely people, but this way is my way of sharing my kind of fun life lessons I'm learning. And it's maybe not so fun as well. Just think of it as just a little encouragement in your inbox once a month. If you have any questions or you want more information about what Deb shared today, all of that will be at the show notes at daniellezapchenk.com. I would love to connect with you more. You can always find me hanging out on Instagram, and you can find me at Danielle Zapchenk. That's Zapchenk. That'll do it for today. Thank you so much, really, for spending time with me. Remember, your parable showcases God's grace while we grow in our lives. So I'll see you back again next week on the Parable Podcast.